Hello everyone. We are really glad to see all of you here. A very good evening from all of us. As you know, we had our previous study meet in September, and that was the first time where we, together came together and we tried to explore questions around education and what does it actually mean to educate our children, and what is it what all does it require, and of course coming together in such study means it's a space where we can together explore these questions and dive deeper into the sharings. So today we also have all the classroom teachers with us, Ramya and Rajeshri, and I'm Janani for those who don't know me, and we have Vaishali with us. And this is also a very special study meet because it's the first time that Bulbul parents and Koil parents are together. So we are really excited about that as well. And we even have Gopalan uncle with us. I'm sure many of you know him already. He has been working in Valley for many years and he lives on the campus as well. So with further ado, I would like Gopalan uncle to take forward today's discussion. Yes, Gopalan uncle.
So, namaste everybody and welcome. I'll just set the ball rolling with a question. Over the last few weeks, I think we have seen very graphic images of buildings toppling in Bangalore. But not just Bangalore, we have seen buildings toppling in Kerala also. And if you ask what is the fundamental reason why the building toppled, it's not because of the rain. It's because the foundation of the building was not adequately strong to stand up to the elements. Now there's something very interesting about this foundation of a building. That foundation decides how tall and strong that building is going to be. That's the first thing. The second thing is that once the superstructure starts coming up, the foundation goes out of sight. You can't see it. You don't know what has been done in it. Only when the building topples you realize that it was not strong enough. And the third thing is that later if you realize that the foundation is not strong enough, there's pretty little you can do about it except pull down the building and reconstruct. Now I would like to take that simile to the children who enter class 1 and their parents. For a human being, I think the first 16 or 17 years is the foundation for his entire life. Now these children have already finished 6 years out of that. Leave that. There's no point even talking about it. We have another 8, 9 or 10 years in which this foundation has to be really built so strong. We don't know how tall this building will go, in what direction it will go, but it has to be able to stand up to all those challenges in life. So my question is, what are those qualities that we would like to put into this foundation which are going to make this foundation strong, allow the building to grow as tall as it needs to grow, and then stand up to all the challenges that they are going to face in the future? What are those qualities? Can we just talk about those qualities, and afterwards maybe we can ask what's the priority of those qualities? But first, can we just identify for ourselves what are those qualities which have to go into this foundation over the next 10 years? Because it's a one-time opportunity that we have. We don't get a second chance on this. So these 10 years in that sense are very important, and you have entered at the entry point. Therefore, you have all the 10 years in front. What do you think are the qualities that need to be put into this foundation?
I would say resilience.
Did you
Resilience.
say resilience? Okay.
I say disciplined.
Discipline. Okay.
The current word, I would say, a sense of empathy.
empathy. Okay.
I think the child or the person should be able to ask a question when it comes to their mind without fear
Okay.
of, without fear of how other people would judge the child or judge the person.
Ask questions without hesitation, shall I say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Self-confidence.
Self-confidence. Yes.
I'm thinking of this in three parts. One is from within, for themselves, to be able to find some joy and content.
Okay.
And this question will keep changing in its answer as they grow.
Right. Right.
To be able to find joy and content with any kind of self-introspection.
Okay.
The second, when they interact with the rest of the world, to be compassionate or to be able to empathize with, to have empathy towards any other being
Right.
or system.
Right. Empathy has
we-
already come, so I'm not noting it again. Okay.
Yes. So the third thing to the world view, I think, to be able to have an opinion of their own, to form an opinion, or to be able to form something. So which means like direction thinking.
Okay. Opinion of their own, and shall I add in that critical thinking?
Critical thinking, yeah. Maybe.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Anybody else?
I think they need a lot of patience too.
Yes. Patience. Okay.
Temperament.
Sorry.
Temperament.
Temperament. Can you just clarify what you mean by temperament?
So reacting to a situation in a way that kind of withstands
Okay.
all the ups and downs.
Okay. Okay. So shall I say ability to respond to a challenge?
Yeah.
Okay. Respond to a challenge. All right. Yes. Anybody else?
Not getting corrupted or distorted with the external influences.
Not getting corrupted by external. Okay.
Acceptance.
We need to get into many of these, what they imply. So acceptance. All right. But can you please clarify what exactly do you mean by acceptance?
Sometimes things may not work according to what they think, or what we think, but then we should be open to understand and accept the situation and work accordingly.
Okay.
Should not be.
Right. I got it. Yes. Anybody else?
I would say being more malleable towards various points of view.
Okay.
That is not being too stuck up or being too rigid, because as they grow up, they'll be exposed to various kinds of points of view, and rigidity is going to get you only so far. I think one should be malleable enough to accept various changes, sudden changes, various points of views. Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, these have a lot of depths to it. We'll get to them. Okay. Not having rigid
Reasoning
opinions.
ability.
Reasoning ability. Yes.
The curiosity, the childlike curiosity.
To maintain curiosity. Yes. Any more?
I would also like to add, I mean, along with the questioning ability, I would say being able to solution an issue along with questions, being able to put forth solutions.
Suggest, should I say suggest a solution?
Suggest.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
suggest.
Okay. Suggest solutions. Yes. Any more? Okay. We have 16 now. Right? 16 points that have come up as of now. And it may or may not be possible to address all 16, because there are so many demands on our time and energy and attention. So if you have to prioritize, what would you say is the first quality that you would like to have in? Because you may not have time to do all 16.
if I can,
Yeah.
empathizing with the rest of the world, the empathy part.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That is also life sense, life sensitive, right? Being sensitive.
Okay.
Situations.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, uncle, that's a trick question because all of these go together one with each other. So it's not very easy to say one is the highest number of all of them. But some sense of resilience to be able to handle what comes at us. But all of these go together, I think.
Yeah. So it was not a trick question. What I was really trying to ask is there, can you name one quality, if you work at that, all the 16 will get covered? Right? If you can work at one quality, all the 16 will be addressed in their own way, because as you pointed out, they are not separate, they are all interconnected. So what's that prime mover that we need to address? What do you think?
If I may take a stab at it, as an adult, you say some level of awareness of yourself allows you to then be, a better human being. For a child, that may be too much to put there. I think, awareness of self may be a little large as a word.
Yeah.
But, a manifestation of that is just kindness to yourself and kindness to everyone around. That could be something that results in all of the others.
Okay. What would you say comes in the way of that?
Observation, like to be able to detach and observe oneself, is a very difficult task.
What makes it difficult?
To critique oneself, or I think emotions maybe, or ego.
Ego comes in the way.
So let's go into yes, go ahead.
The primal nature of us is just to go towards what's more immediate and not what we think we should be. We are driven more by our immediate nature, right? What we want immediately, and that's what usually comes in between.
So that's another. But when we say ego, I mean at the level of, we're now talking of a 6-year-old, right? What exactly is involved when we say ego?
Attachment, a sense of, a sense of feeling judged are things which then get manifested as an ego.
Right. So what is
fear or pressure?
Fear or pressure, the sense of being judged, fear of being judged really.
Yeah.
So let's just look at us now. Let's leave the children. We have the same problems. We wouldn't like to be judged. We wouldn't like a negative comment to be made about us, right? And in work-life situations, this happens all the time. So, what actually makes us touchy about criticism or being judged?
I think we usually tend to form a self-image.
Right.
And
right.
And we become very highly believing in that, and we're not. Somebody was talking about being malleable. Like we become too rigid on our own self-image.
Right. So the whole problem starts with the image of that I have of myself. It's the image which is getting hurt. It's the image which is reacting. Right. Now, can we therefore say that we should help them not build an image about themselves? Is such a thing possible? Because what is image? Every memory that I have is part of that mosaic. And we can't function without memory, we can't function without thought. So it's inevitable that every thought must contribute to that mosaic in whatever way it will. So we can't say, don't cultivate an image. I don't see that being possible. Does anybody see that being possible? So if you can't avoid cultivating the image, then what do you do?
I believe external influence is always there for anyone. Only thing what we can do is we should learn to filter out what is right, what is wrong with whatever our personal character is, and also value the criticism or whatever comments we get. But that can't be stopped. But that may also be a great opportunity to learn also. So if they try to learn, which is, from, they shouldn't take it very personally, probably, or to anyone it is like that. So filter and learn. That's.
But how do you filter?
I think we should be self-aware of ourselves, of what we are, without being biased. That, I think we should be self-aware.
If we just go back to our own childhood, when we have all had this experience of feeling very small or being made to feel very small, right? At that moment when that incident happened which made me feel small, is it that I was not aware why I was feeling small? Did somebody have to explain to me why I felt small? Or did I understand it right then and there? The real reason.
Is it the emotion involved?
Yes, but what is the reason behind that emotion? I'm not the only one to talk. Vaishali, Janani, Rajeshri, Ramya, please, you switch off your mics, then this is a discussion, right? I'm only setting the ball rolling. Yeah, so
I just had one thing. So the minute we name anything as right and wrong, do we need to start from there? Because right and wrong is totally personal and it's in the mind, right? Do we need to start, like, for example, for a child, what is right, wrong? Of course, discipline, all that, that's a secondary step. But that image we form, is it based on, right or wrong? So if we already, before even we start anything, if we are already tagging it as, right or wrong, are we not getting stuck right there? And are we not, stopping the child from exploring anything the minute we give it that tag? Because that always comes to my mind that, that right versus wrong is so much in all of our heads, right?
Can you avoid that? Is it possible to avoid that sense of right and wrong? Because right and wrong is according to a code which I have through my conditioning, right? That's why your sense of right and wrong is going to be different from my sense of right and wrong. But can there ever be a state where I will not have a sense of right and wrong?
I think I will always have my sense of right and wrong, but the awareness that for the other person right and wrong may be very different. Just that awareness, I think, will bring in a lot of peace. Even in small things, I may have a right way of taking a class, whereas my colleague may have a very different way of taking the class. So just, okay, this is the way I think is the best way of doing, but will that be the best way for the other one is something which, if I'm aware of that, then it makes a lot of difference, I guess.
So what I feel is all this boils down to, how seriously you take yourself when you're put in a situation. You could, like we have all been discussing, we could have our own senses of what is right and wrong, but then when you're put in a situation where there is suddenly a lot of points of views coming together, how seriously do you take yourself? I mean, should you be drawing a line beyond which you say, okay, I'm going to be accommodative of others' points of view? I think that's where you sort of dial down the ego and you're being more accommodative. I don't know if that sort of answers or takes us in the direction of an answer to this. Not entirely sure, but I feel that way.
Yeah, let's listen to everybody, because otherwise I tend to talk.
Right or wrong, when we form opinions about right or wrong on what should happen, etc., and that becomes more important than the people's opinion of right or wrong, it creates that, like, if you start valuing people as the more important thing, maybe others is even more important than yourself, and then the actions, etc., maybe you might start thinking in a little bit more accommodative way easily.
So when you said find joy and contentment, right? What comes in the way of that contentment? What the other person may say about this. I mean, as adults, we understand all this. When I don't know how it is in industry today, but when this time comes for annual increments, particularly those which are not linked to the scale, ad hoc increments, it's not how much I get that makes me feel pepped up or low. It's how much the other person got. Right? So, deep down we are always comparing ourselves. Why do we compare ourselves? Why is it that as adults now, let's not worry about that child. Why as adults do we need validation through comparison?
I think we are living in a society where validation is needed for us. We are not living in a forest where there's no one. There is a community, there is a society where we all of us need some validation.
As to why I keep comparing myself, I feel it's a bit of a biological thing, right? We're always trying to become one up than the other person. It is a competitive world. We are hardwired like that. But as human beings, like, I don't know whether we should make an attempt to overcome that biological urge.
I probably beg to differ with that. I think when you look at really young children, of course they have this is my territory, or this is, initially when they start learning how to play, when they start learning, initially they just indulge in playing on their own, and then eventually they start playing with others. I don't see a fierce competitive streak in young children. It's something that we really instill in them in the way we interact with them, and it's like, oh, avunu nodu, avunu ಎಷ್ಟು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾನೆ, but you are not doing just as well. And that sort of, at the subconscious level keeps building up through the years. I think partly due to our schooling as well. There's a rank system everywhere you go. There's always 1, 2, 3. And we are then, by conditioning, we become that competitive. I think what Sandeep is referring to is that evolutionary thing about survival. Yeah, I have to do better than the next guy. But I think they're, as social human beings, we don't have those primal instincts as strongly as we would have been if we were lower mammals. So I think children are inherently not that competitive. They understand that when you share, you actually do well. When you tell them that you give this, you get that, and your group will do better, they will actually, when they start indulging in group play, they automatically start understanding that sharing is a good thing. I actually get more out of it. That competitiveness, I feel, this is my personal opinion, is something that they get conditioned to by the way by their upbringing, by their influences, environmental, societal, etc. And I think it's not completely it's not easy to completely remove those influences, because at some level I think that little competitiveness is necessary for them to strive for excellence, I suppose. But that competition should be with, I feel, yourself. I have to do better than I did yesterday. I have to be a better person than I did yesterday, rather than competition with somebody else, because that always leads to disappointment, despair, and eventually discontentment.
So you touched the core of the problem. A little bit of competition is good, brings out excellence. A little bit of fear is good, it brings in discipline, right? I'm just repeating what I heard from you, right? We all deep down say that. A little bit of it is necessary. Otherwise, if you don't have the authority of the policeman, how will there be law and order in society? and we immediately go to society because that's outside, and we can talk endlessly about the problems outside. So if I can just challenge or stretch some of the statements made. Again, Janani, Rajeshri, Ramya, Vaishali, I'm not the only one talking. You have to come in the way. So one point
actually, Gopalan, if I may say right now, because this primal competition is a primal thing which came. So, but in spite of all this primal competition, I think the animal world is quite happy because after getting, so for example, a lion is hunting, after getting its food, after that for 1-2 days, it's really happy because its stomach is full. But when it comes to competition of us as humans, just because I get food, I'm not happy. I need a car, I need something else. So for me, or I need to be better than my colleague in whatever. So for a primal competition, I think they are content in spite of all the competition. But somehow humans, we are not content because if I have enough food, my child has to have enough food, my grandchild, so I'll keep saving, and nothing is enough. Or somebody is always better than me in my life. So I, with that in my mind, I will never be able to be happy because there will be somebody definitely better or higher than me at all points of time. Even if I'm the best person, let's say I'm the best engineer in Bangalore, but then I'll say, oh, engineer, but the doctors are earning more. So, I mean, where is the end to this?
The other way around, actually.
No, but wait, Vaishali.
No, I think that's greed, isn't it? That sort of then goes into the realm of greed.
Absolutely. But Vaishali, I'd like to ask you one thing. See, in the school, you must have observed these monkeys around you all the time, right? There's always one adult male monkey. Nobody challenges that male. And there is order among the monkeys. Let one of those younger monkeys start challenging the adult and you see the fight that happens. Right?
Yeah.
Now, the fact remains that our brains have evolved from the animal brain. And there is an element of that reptilian brain according to biology, right? Deep down in us. So, there are responses that come from deep within, which are from that animal hereditary wealth that we have carried with us. But as human beings, we also have the capability to observe this coming in us and be watchful about it. Do we not? I think that is the human dimension which we have, which the animal doesn't have. So, how do you build this ability to observe what is coming from you? I won't put the blame on society, because who comes first? Do I come first or society comes first? I come first. If I don't exist, where is society? Right? So, and when you talked about the fact that young children don't have it, I would like Janani, Rajeshri and Ramya to come in here on this. When you have a group of the same age or even a mixed age in younger children, right? You'll always find one or two wanting to dominate. And then you see the dynamics of that place. Why does a 5-year-old want to dominate or a 4-year-old want to dominate the others? So this wanting to dominate is again a very deeply embedded trait in us. I don't know whether they just get it from society. It probably comes inborn, and that's why no two children are the same. Right? But still we are asking, unless you allow what is inside to come out and see it in the light of day, you don't even know that it is there. So how do you allow this opportunity for a person to be able to watch this trait coming from inside? Because unless it comes up, you can't watch. If we straight away stop it and say, no, this is right and wrong, this can't come here, we have suppressed it forever, it's going to come up sometime. So, without being a danger to himself, without being a danger to other children, without being a danger to anybody, how do you allow something to come up and you observe it, and then your intelligence says, this is not sensible. How does one do that? And what comes in the way of doing that?
the ability to probably distinguish between one's wants and needs.
Yeah, but to a 5 or 6 year old, how do you differentiate between wants and needs?
Yeah, for a child probably yes, but as an adult you probably would want to condition yourself to be able to distinguish between a want and a need. Probably that would help go a large way in stopping.
Have we been able to do it in our lives as adults?
It is not easy, but it's definitely not easy.
So when it's not easy for us, how is it going to happen? How do you enable this to happen for the child?
Sir, I'd like to add something here.
Yeah.
Like you rightly said, each of us are wired differently. Even children are wired differently. So no one communication works for anybody. Whether it's an adult, whether it's a child, all of us, the wiring is completely different. So I think to start with, we can look at letting the child experience. And I mean, mostly I think it's an art for a teacher or a parent. It's an art. So we need to understand that maybe for some children it works when they experience it, and we allow them to, kind of go through that journey. That way they can figure out whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do.
So what you are saying is, don't have only one way which every child has to conform to. Keep as many ways as possible so that there is a minimum of conformity. Experience means what? You don't have, the result is not already fixed, the way is not already fixed, you find your way. Huh? This is one of the things.
Minimum interference.
Right. So what comes in the way of that for the child or for the adult? Because if we understand what comes in the way, then it becomes easier to say what is it that we need to do.
The key here is, as we are all agreeing, each child is unique. Each child has its own, his or her own qualities. The most challenging part is to nurture that quality, right? So basically we should not be suppressing their qualities that's what I think. For example, like whatever fear or anything, the minute a child is trying to jump from a chair, we say don't be careful. Instead of saying at least be careful, we'll say you will fall. So right there we are just stopping it. So we are suppressing some quality. Like I'm just naming one example. So similarly, the nurturing of their original quality is what is so critical. But as they keep growing as adults, I think based on our conditioning and our experience, we try to keep suppressing, maybe in subtle ways, right? Of course, we have the best interest at heart, but knowingly or unknowingly, we are just suppressing that nature, that original nature of each child. So I think we need to really think and see how we are behaving around the child. That is one step probably.
Anybody else like to suggest something?
Yeah, that is one thing, because there is nothing to teach them. They learn more with observation at this age. So how we conduct ourselves or with surroundings, with people, with life around us, they're just absorbing it. So that is one thing where we create the atmosphere for the child to be nurtured, or the way it's said. But my problem, like Gopalan sir, you mentioned, some children, they come with natural instincts of being competitive, because that I see in my child. Naturally, whenever she wants to run, her hand will come, so that she wants the other children to be behind, and she needs to be the dominance which has come with natural instinct. So those kind of things which have come as a genetical distortion or whatever, how do we address those things? That was also my.
So, what is the root of that instinct which says I must dominate? This is what I was trying to get at. Because
that I did understand. So
I'm only saying that is the common ground for every one of these qualities. Is it not insecurity? When are you afraid of somebody overtaking you? Only when you feel insecure. If you are not insecure, what's your problem when somebody running faster than you? Children very easily say, yes, he runs faster than me. They compare, but there's no problem in that. Right? So, this root of insecurity, if I may suggest, and I'm suggesting this is the fundamental issue. It gives rise to every one of the other problems. And it comes in the way of every one of those other qualities which we want. You want critical thinking? I'm scared to ask that question. What will they say about me? Or will the teacher get angry? Or will my manager get angry? Will I get on his wrong side? Before I even ask the question, it is the questions from insecurity start coming first. And therefore we hesitate to get into any action. So I'm suggesting, because I wanted the discussion to take a direction, right? So that it's not just going round and round, but we are moving on this. Is this sense of security that you can give a child in these 15 years the most valuable thing that you can give a child? A sense of security which doesn't mean an assurance that you will succeed every time. You may not. Right? Falling down is not failure. This is I think the most wrong message which our education system has given. If you fall down, that's a failure. And people who don't come through the system, they have got it. I don't know if some of you saw that India Today interview with Rakesh Jhunjhunwala after he met the Prime Minister. You know, that man was talking partially in Hindi and partially in English. But there are two things he said which caught me immediately. One, he said, management and cooking cannot be taught, they have to be learnt. That is a statement of insight. No, I would stretch it further. Can anything be taught, or it can only be learnt? So when we say teacher, we actually mean instructor. That's our understanding of teacher. What can you instruct a person in? You may say, go this way, but until he goes, he doesn't learn. And what prevents us coming in from that is, will I be late? Will I miss the bus? Will I take a wrong turn? Will I fall behind? All this comes in the way of allowing any exploration. So, if in these foundation years of a child, one can allow that child that ability to feel secure and to make a mistake, nothing wrong. A lesson is learned from the mistake. That was the second point which I got from Jhunjhunwala. Mistake is nothing. Seek liya usse. It was such a great statement. Seek liya mistakes. Right? What's wrong if you've made? See, we are coming from a different environment today. When I was in school, detentions were very common. There were so many children who spent 2 years in 5th standard, 2 years in 6th standard, 2 years in 7th standard. They were scarred for life because of the way they were detained, right? But detentions are very common. Now we have the other extreme. I don't know if you have been reading this. Delhi University this year, the cutoff marks are 100% in every field. Right? Somebody went to the court, Delhi High Court. They said 40% of admissions have been taken by students from Kerala. This is unfair. And then the chairman of the Kerala Higher Secondary Board, he says, we know that this is a pandemic year, so we have widened our window. Everybody is getting 100%. So, if you get 100% in that, does it mean anything to you as a person who wrote the exam? Do you really value that 100% and the first prize you get when you know that you haven't really worked and earned it? So this sense that you have to earn something. And what you have earned, that's the truth. It's not less or more, it's the truth. How do you give all this, unless you can provide that sense of security and say, move, life is a journey, flow. If there is a block at this time, there is a block at this time. We find out what to do next. The moment we start this measuring and the timetable and put the milestones, and then our minds will always come up. But if you don't have a framework, why will the child want to do his homework? Right? To me, the challenge is, why would the child want to do homework if he feels it repetitive? That means there's a different approach required there. Unless I get the child involved, investigate and journey, but that requires a very, very different structure, and there's a sense of safety for us in the structure that we create. And there, doesn't the problem begin there?
Just to add to that, sir, I think what you say is true. Even when I look at Maya's case, she loves to paint, and when she paints, the first thing she asks me is, does it look nice? She's immediately very critical of her own painting, and there are times when she draws something which I absolutely love, and I've seen she's torn it up because she feels she's already critiqued herself, saying that I don't think it looks great. So I think you're absolutely right. I think the root cause is one, insecurity, and viewing it as a failure. Like I always, when you were saying that, I think Thomas Edison is the one who said, right, I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
Exactly.
Before I found something that actually worked. So it's really a journey, and I know, Mithun and I at least are very conscious about continuously, even in activities that she does, whether it's reading or painting or playing football, to enjoy it. There's never an end goal that we put to that task. So where does it come from for her? Like, why is she so self-critical about things that she enjoys? And I know the school, the people she interacts with is us essentially, and her grandparents and children at school. So we sometimes wonder where it comes from. And this
was...
Uncle, I also wanted to ask the same question, Uncle. So with these 6 or 7-year-old children, where did this sense of insecurity comes in? Like either we have to contribute via whom we contributing as parents or teachers or adults around them, is my question. Because they are too young to understand that wide meaning of insecurity, what I am feeling. Like, are we contributing? It's my question actually.
See,
can I just come in here?
Please.
Sorry, Gopalan uncle.
Go ahead.
I could be totally off the mark here, but also this might not be the reason for it. But as the discussion was happening, this popped up in my mind that unconsciously, maybe we, at the times when they do really well, it comes to us as a reflex to really praise them. Saying that, you've done a wonderful job. Wow, how did that turn out? And I think somewhere subconsciously that sort of gives them the scale of, what is really good and what might not be really good or needs improvement. I don't know. Could a reaction like that in the positive circumstances contribute to a scale?
So children are seeking approval from a very early age, and what you pointed out is the kind of approval that they seek, right? And you find some babies are very contented and some are perpetually demanding attention. So they're born with those insecurities. It's not necessarily that the insecurity has just come from outside, but whatever inherent quality is there has been nurtured in a particular way, right? So if a child is insecure, what do? You give him security. Unless you give him security, nothing else will move. So that's all we need to do, is it not? Doesn't it make sense to give the child the security that he needs until he learns to walk, until he learns to talk, until he learns to write, until he learns to move at every stage? And does that ever stop, whatever be the age of the child?
I'd like to just pick up the thread from where Rajneesh shared. I'm not sure if I'm off track. I think children and especially of 6, age of 4, 5, 6, very, very strong observational skills, very strong. So subconsciously, definitely, not subconsciously, but even consciously, they are observing us and folks around them. But does it also mean that when we praise them, we don't overpraise them, so that do we need to be ourselves be sort of mindful about that aspect?
So when we praise them, see, when you appreciate a job well done, is that praise? Right? And would that be only a one-off occasion, or every time you appreciate there would be that? But when the child doesn't do something, there would also be a demand. Now, this is a situation which has changed in the world outside. 50 years ago, families were larger. There were very, very few children who had no siblings. If not direct siblings, there would be cousins in the house. So you shared a lot of things, and in that process, amongst themselves, the equation settled a lot of things. Today, children are getting enormous attention because they are the only ones there, and they're the parent, the grandparent, and right, the child is getting all that attention. There's a cost to that too, and it comes out like this in different ways. Right? That doesn't mean you don't give. I would say they are lucky to have grandparents, because children also need to be pampered. They've earned it somewhere in their past karma. That's why they're getting pampered today. That's okay. Get pampered. But can they also get this message that everything is earned in life? There's nothing coming free. How do you give that message? Now, see, I mean, to me, it's the very small things, but it's not happening. It's very difficult today that once a day the family will get together for a meal. It's very difficult in today's environment. With 24-hour clocks running and everybody in their own schedule, it's very difficult for that to happen. That simple act brought in a certain atmosphere. When I was young, the grandfather of the house, he was 80s, every year, every day, 6 o'clock in the evening, he would call everybody in the house. Everybody sat 15 minutes, did some singing, chanting, went. Right? It was the grandfather who held that. The moment he went away, all that disappeared. So there was something that was there in that structure. Not everything was good, but something. But we didn't have the choice. Things have changed. We have lost both the good and the beneficial and the disadvantage. But somewhere we need, I think, to question what is that environment we are going to provide this child. It's not just what appalls me more than anything today is young children. They say, I have my bedroom and I close the bedroom door. Now that's, for me, that's I can't understand it, because we've never lived in houses with doors. Right? Is it necessary? Or I would put it the other way, maybe is it necessary is too subjective a question. Is there a cost to a child having his own bedroom? I read a very interesting piece. I forgot his name. This man who started Sun Microsystems, right? He had this big house with 11 bedrooms or whatever, but he had a rule in the house. Until the child went to college, they would all share one bedroom and they had bunk beds. And that eldest son of his was railing, saying, the others are not allowing me to study. So until you go to college, you don't get a separate bedroom. I mean, this man had that insight. So, I mean, I get very disturbed when I see this. Child comes in and he says, where's my bedroom? My bedroom at the age of 6 and 7. So it comes down to this, I think, is what is the most valuable thing that we can provide these 10, 15 years. That environment which says, look, there's nothing mine and yours in this. We just happen to be lucky that we have all this. There's somebody across the street who doesn't have. So can we bring in the sharing? Can we bring in all that? In fact, in some things I sometimes speak my mind and people don't like it, but I say these privileged schools, why aren't they adopting a school across the village and saying, when we eat, you will eat. We don't share anything. We build these huge walls, we live inside our bubbles, and I think that is going to do tremendous harm to these children when they grow up. I don't think our children know how to travel by public transport today. How will they? Right? From a young age, they've been only driving in the car. So, and now today we are hesitant to send them in public transport. They go walk up to the silk farm, get a bus, get down at the metro station, buy a ticket. We'd rather not. And if we don't do it now, later we don't want to, we say, have the car, let's use the car, it's safer. This COVID has brought in, it's safer for everything. Somewhere I think that experiencing is necessary. The world is not a bubble, but you can't give it as a harsh experience. You have to understand that there is a world outside this bubble that we live. How does one bring that? That there is somebody else there who doesn't have. In whatever way, there's no planned way for that. Is it necessary to do that? But I would really like you to think about this business about insecurity and fear. Because if insecurity and fear can be addressed in a child, and he doesn't get over it, but he learns how to address it. When he comes to his class 10 exam, when he comes to his class 12 exam, when he goes up further in professional life, if he learns to address insecurity and fear, address in the sense, he is able to understand where it's coming from, what kind of a reaction it is, what is causing that, not because somebody tells him, because he's seen it in himself. If we have been able to give a child that ability, then why would you hesitate to speak out, or any of these qualities that we listed of self-confidence, this is that. Why would it not come? Sudhir, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Gopalan sir, I would like to pose the same question you posed to me. How do you communicate this to the child?
Yeah. So, the child is learning more from what I don't say. He is learning the unsaid part of it from me most of the time, not what I say. So it becomes incumbent on me to keep watching what is it that I am communicating. Am I communicating insecurity in some way? Is my insecurity causing me to react? So how I am watching my own living is going to communicate to the child something unsaid. It's the unsaid communication which becomes valuable and which really hits the mark, not the lectures that I give you. So, if I may suggest, we should continue this question of fear and insecurity. what is it that we should do or not do to encourage that child to encourage every person to be able to first observe the insecurity in oneself, understand that I am reacting from that, and in watching and understanding, I think that has its own action. But how do you allow that to happen? At home, school, everywhere.
Quality of humbleness should be instilled in the children. Being humble, children these days are getting all whatever they want. They before even asking, they are getting it. So I think from first, parents should try to teach them humbleness, not give them right away what they ask, and slowly patience also, so that this birthday you don't get this, the next birthday you get this. So they get the quality of patience and being humble. I think that quality is needed.
But can we communicate that quality of humbleness by saying that, okay, this birthday you got a gift, you are not getting it for the next one, you will get one the year after. Is it possible? Or, I'm just asking, see, why is that happening? It happens that they are in an environment where there's a lot of affluence. Good. So you get something, but when you get something, will you also give something to somebody else? Could it be done that way?
Yeah, I think instead of celebrating a birthday, let's go to an anath ashrama and give away things to children, or do something like that instead of spending money on big birthdays.
No, I won't say instead of spending money. I don't want to say don't spend. I'm only saying, look, we are used to thinking that birthday party means big cake, all my friends, this, right? We all already have this. So is it possible to ask, okay, you have this, but shall we also feed somebody who doesn't get a chance? See, that that kind of a contact has its own movement. We can't plan the whole thing, but we can try out. Just to keep saying that, look, we have to be thankful that we've got so much. So can we also share? Can we also share that? And it's not a planned, organized thing, but that is something that comes from inside, right? So can we encourage that sharing? Isn't that one of the ways you break down that sense of individuality? I all the time.
Gopalank, I had a little unsettling thought, so I just want to ask this question. So we're talking about creating an environment where we give enough support or assurance on the whole aspect of not being insecure, or giving enough, I don't know whether it means to give safety, resources, or psychological safety, or whatever be it, to not trigger insecurity. Is there an alternate thought that is it also possible to create a sense of content, or where the comparison doesn't even come? If you're content, the comparison doesn't come. So is there something which is like a parallel word there with the element of contentness, where this sense of comparison or insecurity doesn't happen? Is that another alternate way to go on this path?
And I think one of the greatest ways of doing that is to sit and have a chat with a child and take out one of these any food packet that you get, and discuss with him what are all that list of ingredients, and how you point out that how there are these chemicals and that chemical, and they're all doing you harm. So instead of buying ready-made food, right, whatever we want to have, shall we make it ourselves and involve the child, including the clearing up afterwards? Right? This, I think really, this ready availability of product to eat, you just have to fling a few rupees and you get that, right? You never work for it, you never understand what is involved in it, then you don't get the contentment of it also. But the days before refrigerators, you know how we had ice cream? You had a wooden bucket, an ice cream machine, right? And then we learned what is a freezing mixture. You got salt and big blocks of ice, and you broke it up and put it around that, and then you cranked this, and after 1 hour of cranking you got ice cream. You really earned that ice cream when you have the whole family has sat and cranked it, right? Today 50 rupees you can just buy something from Baskin Robbins or whatever. You don't get it. Yeah, think about it. I think we should continue this discussion, because if we can learn how to approach fear and insecurity, right, and question some of our own assumptions. Little fear is necessary for discipline. A little comparison is necessary for motivation, for excellence. If we can even question our own assumptions in that, and what are our fears in that. If you don't have that structure, will this fellow go absolutely flat and he is not interested in reading, writing, therefore he will become completely illiterate? Is it our fear? So are we also projecting from our fear? Yes, Vaishali?
Can I put points? Like when you said the untold is more accepted by a child, I totally agree on that. So like the way they get some situations, even we as parents, we as elders, we would have found a lot of situations and they would be seeing us, like how we handle it. And many times I've seen my son, looking at me how I solve or what I follow. And sometimes, yes, even I'm a human, I would have done something not appropriate probably. But as a child, when the same kind of things happen to him, I might have, because I'm outside that situation, I might have told him like, no, it's not the way to react. That is when he points out to me that, this is what happened with you. And that is when I realized, oh yeah, because I was in that situation, I didn't realize. So maybe the way we project, but complete onus will not be on any person. Each individual is different. So I feel that is when I started learning a lot from him. When I asked him, when I spoke to him, how do you think we can handle these? He gave such wonderful ideas. And, I was very happy to hear, maybe if I was not biased by so many things, I would have also thought similarly. So I feel the insecurity, what we face, if we try to, sometimes when I have made some mistake and he tries to point out, then I try to correct it and, project to him. He's also done that back when he's faced such things. So that is how we try to learn from each other.
So there has to be dialogue, right? And this is what comes when you have a family meal. Because in that meal, during the day, something would have happened and different points of view will come, so dialogue happens.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But see, let me point out something else which I have always been very amused by. Our school bus, at least before when we were running from all the distance, the first point is 6:45, starting point, right? A child gets up at 6:15 or 6:20, 25, and quickly he's got ready and he has to be rushed to the bus. He'll miss the bus and he can't go hungry. So you're trying to push a glass of milk into him. He is not hungry, right? He is not hungry, right? And this is a perpetual problem. So one year we came up with a very creative solution. Years ago, we said let's start the school at 6:30 and give them breakfast in school. But I started it and I got brickbats and I got bouquets also for that. Anyway, that's a different issue. I'm only saying, why, if the child has to catch the bus at 6:45, he has to be at the bus stop at 6:40, he has to leave home at 6:25, right? He needs to get up by 5:15, 5:30, right? Why is it that he is not rising by 5:15, 5:30? Because the previous day he went to bed late, and there's a whole cycle in that, right? That cycle is deeply intertwined with our way of lifestyles, and today that is the pressure really. our lifestyles are such that they stretch with this 24-hour clock, it's gone crazy. But somewhere, if the child, there used to be a nursery rhyme about going to bed by 8 o'clock. There's a lot of sense in that. See, a child who goes to bed early will naturally rise early. But to go to bed early, right, he can't be watching something exciting at 7 o'clock on the TV, which means that you are reading to him a story. Now, if you are reading to him a story, that's that much time you are giving. You can't do anything else at that time. So, the lifestyle of the parent, it cannot but affect the lifestyle of the child. And that's where the hard decisions really come, because we are managing multiple demands and there are compromises in that, and it has its effects.
Eight minutes past time.
Yeah. So if I may suggest, I would suggest that we just continue with this whole issue of insecurity and fear, because if we find something from that, how to approach it, it will come to lifestyle level. You can't avoid that. Right? You can't avoid that. So that's the decision individually which a parent has to take. Is it not? But this is, I can go this far, I can't go more. That's the fact. That's the limitation. Yes, Janani, Rajeshri, I'm talking all the time. Ramya.
Maybe when this was happening, there's one thing, one thing which was coming to my mind. So when we were saying that we cannot project what we internally don't have. So I remember one of my experience, I started teaching like languages, something which I've never taught. And with these young children, Radha used to teach English. And I used to feel that, wrong spelling. If a child writes cat as C and T, I would think, this is a wrong spelling. But when she used to say C-T, correct, I was to say, what? Then she says, the children are still learning only the consonants and vowels have not yet come, or sound has not yet come, and it will come. So at their stage, this is right. When they move to the next level, something else may be right. So, until I understood this internally, I would always think that this is a wrong spelling. In everything, when the child is developing, we have expectations which are adult level expectations, and the child may be right in his own ways. So somehow when we say right and wrong, but if I feel wrong, that something is wrong, it will, even if I don't say it, it will be projected. Just to accept that the child, or understand that the child is still in this developmental stage, and according to this is right. Unless I have understood it, that will not project in any way, even if I try. I feel this is wrong, and the child will see that. So I think the secure environment, I feel, is in the sense to really understand things well, rather than, and then, because if I don't have something, there's no way I can project it. If I think it's wrong, even if I say it's right, the projection is going to be it's wrong. So just, I was remembering, or when I see feedback, some of the art teachers giving feedback. So when I heard that the child tearing things, or I have seen children rubbing off the whole page of things just because they thought that's not good enough. Well, the teacher thinks it's perfect, and the child has this insecurity. And if the teacher somehow teacher or parent is projecting that it's right and actually feeling that it's right, then only it makes a difference. Because if I say this is not right in my head, it is going to be seen by the child, even if I try to hide. So so this secure environment, I think, is something which I guess, all need to make for our children and for ourselves and our colleagues and everybody else. So
for everybody.
Everybody.
So would we like to continue with this dialogue? Any other, or is this the last session? I'm just asking this question.
We should
if you want, we can organize. Maybe you can talk to Janani and Ramya later also. But I feel if we think it's valuable, school is we can organize more sessions at whatever frequency we would like to. Yeah. So maybe we will not discuss that right now, but you could give your feedback to Janani and Ramya separately, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, these
Is that
sessions
okay,
will
Gopala?
definitely helps, ma'am, because there are many points already we feel the guilt. Some things which we have not taken care. There might be small problems which are not taken care. So these kind of things gives the awareness.
Definitely. So if we really need this,
these sessions are not meant to make you feel a sense of guilt, right? That is why I started saying, look, first 15 years is the foundation for a child. 6 years has gone. There is no point in our doing post-mortem analysis what happened in the first 6 years and feeling bad about it. That doesn't serve any purpose, right? We've had an opportunity to start discussing now. There is only movement forward. There is no backward movement. So please don't bring in guilt. Guilt comes because I feel I should have done this, and then it's it's my intellect running. So there's no guilt. No
Guilt in the sense that, Gopalan sir, you said no, not having a separate room. That is because unconsciously first she wanted a bunker bed because she saw somewhere else. So the bunker bed came, along with that comes one table. So in that way, my bunker bed, my table, my play area. So without intention, we have already sowing the seed.
No, see, there are very simple workarounds for that. In the house, we don't close doors. Simple workarounds, right? We'll find our workaround, but guilt has no place. And the idea of this is not to make you feel guilty, saying that what have I been doing so far and have I done harm? No. We are just, we are exploring for ourselves. From whatever we see, we will take a turn for ourselves. That's all it is. So no guilt.
So in that aspect, these sessions will definitely help, sir. We should keep meeting and discussing.
What we'll do is maybe whoever thinks we should continue can send a mail either to Janani and Ramya, whoever your group teacher is. If there are enough number of people interested, we can decide a frequency and continue. Does that sound good, Gopalan?
Yeah.
Janani, Ramya? Okay.
These sessions are only for first and year-based, or it is across the junior school?
Actually, the way study center session happens is twice a year for every group. Now, what has happened is, during this last session, it was like the parents have come up and said that can we have more sessions? Otherwise, a standard is 2 study center sessions for parents every year. And because of, I think from Bulbul's group, this came that shall we have more sessions? The parents have come up. So we said, why not? I mean, if parents are wanting to have the sessions. So since there were Bulbuls also, we said Koyals also can come in by. So that's where this group. But for others, this particular question we wanted to explore, and it started from there. So if we want to continue, we'll continue. Whenever we want to stop, we can stop. Okay, I think we are 16 minutes up time and we should actually stop now.
So thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Uncle.